You ever meet someone who just doesn't care about sports? Like, everyone around them is yelling about last night's game and they're just completely unbothered. For the longest time, I thought those people were strange. But the older I get, the more I realize something. The people who don't obsess over sports often think differently, and in ways that can actually teach us a lot about life. Because sometimes the thing you don't chase says more about you than the thing you do. So today, I want to break down the psychology behind people who aren't glued to scores, rivalries, and highlight reels, and why some of their habits might be exactly what you need if you're trying to improve your life. Let's start with something simple. People who don't obsess over sports don't feel the need to belong through trends. Most of us don't realize how much of our lives revolve around fitting in. You hear coworkers talk about a game and suddenly you're Googling the final score so you don't feel left out. You pretend to know a player's name. You nod along like you've been a fan for years. But people who don't care, they don't do that performance. And the psychology behind that is interesting. They get validation from within, not from the crowd. Their identity doesn't depend on being part of a group conversation. This matters because a lot of us struggle with that exact thing, feeling behind, feeling like we're not in the loop, feeling pressure to keep up with people who seem more passionate than we are. When you stop caring about impressing everyone, you unlock so much mental freedom. And the people who don't obsess over sports often live in that freedom daily. Here's another big one. People who don't obsess over sports usually have a different relationship with time. Think about it. Sports fandom can easily swallow 20 to 30 hours a week. Games, interviews, podcasts, debates, scrolling highlight clips, the works. But the people who don't dive into all that, they tend to invest their attention more intentionally. This doesn't mean they're more productive, it just means they're aware of where their hours go. And if you've ever dealt with procrastination or burnout, you know how hard it is to manage your attention. You sit down to work, but suddenly you're on your phone. You try to relax, but your brain won't let you. You start something important and somehow end up doing the easy thing instead. People who don't obsess over sports often escape that because their lives aren't built around scheduled distraction. They're not waiting for kickoff. They're not planning weekends around games. They're not mentally replaying a loss from 2 nights ago. They have space that the rest of us fill with noise. And that space is where self-improvement actually happens.
Here's something nobody talks about. Sports consume emotional bandwidth. Highs, lows, stress, frustration. You get attached to something you can't control, and that does something to your nervous system. People who don't obsess over sports, they've accidentally mastered emotional detachment. Not in a cold or aloof way, but in a way that protects their peace. You know that feeling when you're already stressed from work, you're already doubting yourself, you're already exhausted, and then your team loses? It hits harder than it should, because it's one more thing going wrong. People who stay away from that roller coaster spend their emotional energy differently. They put it into relationships, hobbies, learning, or simply keeping their mental state steady. If you're someone who constantly feels drained or overwhelmed, sometimes it's not because your life is too stressful. It's because too many things are allowed to tug at your emotional state. And this group of non-sports obsessed people, they naturally minimize that. Now, this one might sting a little. A lot of people use sports as an escape, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all need breaks. But there's a difference between taking a break and hiding from your life. People who don't obsess over sports often don't use entertainment to avoid their problems. They feel bored and they sit with it. They feel lost and they ask why. They feel like they're falling behind and they start making changes. That's uncomfortable. Actually dealing with your own mind is uncomfortable, but you can't grow if you're constantly distracting yourself. In a weird way, people who aren't into sports are practicing a form of psychological self-awareness without even realizing it. They don't mask the emptiness, they confront it.
One of the strongest psychological traits of people who don't obsess over sports is this. Their self-worth isn't attached to external wins. They're not living through a team. They're not measuring their year by championships. Their identity comes from who they are, not what someone else accomplishes. And when your identity is internal like that, you become less reactive, less insecure, less dependent on what other people think. This is huge for anyone battling self-doubt or feeling behind in life, because so much of our suffering comes from comparison. Who's succeeding? Who's further ahead? Who's winning? But people who don't obsess over sports often don't live in that headspace. They build identity from growth, from things they can control. Let's break this down into practical steps you can try. 1. Audit where your attention actually goes. Not to judge yourself, just to see the truth. Awareness is step 1 in taking your power back. 2. Create 1 hour a day with zero spectator mode. No watching others, no scrolling, just doing something for you, even if it's small. 3. Practice emotional detachment from things you can't control. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. 4. When you feel bored, resist the urge to fill the space immediately. Let your mind breathe. That quiet space is where new ideas show up. 5. Build identity around effort, not outcomes. Who you're becoming matters way more than who you're cheering for. These aren't huge steps, but they create huge shifts. So here's the psychology of people who don't obsess over sports. They think independently. They value their time. They protect their emotional energy. They don't run from themselves. And they build identity from within, not from the outside world. And whether you're into sports or not, these are lessons worth learning. Try just one thing tonight, maybe the 1 hour no spectator mode rule, or maybe just observe where your attention goes. Small steps create big changes, and we're doing this together, one honest improvement at a time.